For more than 2,000 years, Asia Minor and the Aegean have been hailed as the bridge between worlds, the convergence of East and West. In antiquity, the region served as the battleground of kings, the fertile foundation for sprawling cities, and for others their fated demise.
Our 2-week odyssey will take us to some of the most notable and important sites in the classical world: Izmir, Ephesus, Sardis, Pergamon, and Troy, attempting to answer the question that started this project. How has the preservation of these monumental sites affected our understanding of antiquity?
Battling the scorching heat and Mediterranean sun, join us as we trek across the Aegean coastline to some of its greatest sites and investigate Asia Minor's preservation of antiquity. Our odyssey begins in the Ege, the heart of Turkey's Aegean region. Strategically situated in an enclosed gulf, the city of Izmir is in a prime location for trade and commerce, and being contested for its inherent political advantage.
Izmir and its environs have been at the heart of a history spanning from the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Byzantines and the present day. Already a large settlement in the Archaic period, Izmir, then called Smyrna, grew rapidly under Alexander the Great and was a prominent city in its own right by the time of the Roman period. It is then not surprising that continuous habitation has maintained the essence of the ancient city. The lively character of Izmir has lasted through millennia: noisy streets lined with bustling businesses, restaurants still churning out millennia-old recipes, and the harbour, a continuous flurry of activity. Located mere steps away from the outskirts of Izmir's sprawling Kemeraltı Bazaar lie the ruins of the ancient marketplace, the Agora of Smyrna. In antiquity, the Agora was a centre of civic activity and is often structured as a series of buildings around an open square, much like the Roman Forum. The Smyrna Agora is no different. Its Greek structure was built upon through time as the space evolved to meet the needs of a changing city. Much of the Agora from the Hellenistic period that we see today was rebuilt by the philosopher emperor Marcus Aurelius in 178 CE after an earthquake shook the region and destroyed almost all of the original Greek structures. Today, only a few parts of the site remain. The Faustina Gate, named after the wife of Marcus Aurelius, the West Stair, and the North Stair, which houses the Roman Basilica, characterised by its long corridors of arches.
The Roman Basilica architecture, traditionally a space used for civic activity, was later adopted and inspired the architecture for Christian churches. Insofar as we know, Smyrna's basilica was, in fact, the largest of its kind in the Roman world, demonstrating the immense political importance of the ancient city.
The site would have acted as a sort of courthouse where the legal affairs of the city could be seen to. However, it was also the preferred location for traders and bankers to conduct their commercial activities.
Excavations have shown us that the northern front of the basilica was originally lined with vaulted shops. The ruins build a picture of a bustling market with spiced meats and a fabric canopy overhead, protecting the sellers and shoppers from the strong Mediterranean sun. It's hard not to think of the Kemeraltı Bazaar and its own vaulted shops, which, over 2 millennia later, is still the commercial heart of this modern city and just a stone's throw away from the ancient Agora.
Having explored both the ancient Agora and the modern bazaar, we were struck by the similarities between ancient and modern. It was clear that the practical aspects of the historical city had endured through time. We couldn't help but feel that the very same bustle and energy of the Kemeraltı Bazaar, with its eclectic stalls and enthusiastic sellers, were also captured in the ruins of the ancient Agora. We were presented with a site whose original use as an important centre of trade and commerce had persisted through time, evolving to meet the differing contemporary needs of each age and empire, yet still managing to maintain that same energy and purpose, to facilitate the activities of a thriving city.
Our short stay in Izmir gave us the best possible introduction to the region and history that we could have hoped for. The marble columns of our textbooks had now materialised before us, and so we, like the travellers of Smyrna, had ventured into the heart of the region and now set our sights southwards towards Ephesus.
A short hour's drive southwards from Izmir, passing mountains lined with olive groves, we encountered a strong Aegean breeze and our second sight, the city of Ephesus.
Today, only a quarter of the once sprawling metropolis, home to a wide variety of cultures, religions and lives, has been excavated. Whilst the library, avenues and amphitheatres have rightfully claimed their place in our textbooks, we must also consider the people who inhabited this city, and how they, as Ephesians, built both the image and fabric of the city itself.
Like many of the sites on the project, Ephesus has had recorded human activities since the Bronze Age, thanks in part to its strategic position on the Aegean coastline. In the classical period, however, it was the continuous migration of the Greeks from the west that quickly gave rise to the immense power of the early city-state of Ephesus, which sat atop the political confederacy of cities along the coast of Asia Minor.
Within the city's torrid timeline of warring empires and enigmatic leaders altering the identity of Ephesus, religion remained a core part of the city's identity, which is vital to our understanding of the site today. Indeed, this Aegean hillside has seen both Greek and Roman polytheism, early Christianity, and most recently, Islam. Under those early Greeks, the first iteration of the most lasting figure of the city's image was established, the goddess Artemis. Ephesus is a site shrouded in mythology. Born in the local grove of Ortygia, the Greek twin deities Apollo and Artemis are an integral part of this site. They are the god and goddess of the sun and of hunting and fertility, respectively. The city's dedication to the mother goddess remained constant, and her cult can be traced throughout the history of the city. Croesus, the last of the Lydian kings, was the first to conquer the city of Ephesus.
The temple itself has a rather fiery history. It was raised from the ground by the Cimmerians after they had just sacked the city. It was then taken by the Lydians but quickly conquered by the Persian emperor Cyrus the Great.
After his attack in 560 BC, Croesus began construction on the third great wonder of the ancient world, the Temple of Artemis. Today we can only imagine the temple's true proportions, as much like its Lydian creators, all of it has been lost to time.
The temple is also believed to be the site in which the high priest prophesied the scourge of Asia, the same day in which Alexander the Great was born, who would later reconquer the city from the Persians.
Here, however, on the Akkadian Way, we can see just how real this prophecy would have been for the Ephesians. In 344 BCE, Alexander the Great brought vast swathes of Asia Minor into the Macedonian fold. A new harbour and road from the city were built in his honour. This avenue is just one of the great civic projects transforming the city under Alexander.
Today, the city's most expansive example of this period is this incredible amphitheatre. An estimated 25,000 Ephesians would have filled this space, watching performances and orators from across the Roman world. They would have also had an unobscured view of the sea, which has now receded. Evidence suggests that Ephesus was a bustling city well into the Seljuk period, a port of predominance that, in the words of geographer Strabo, was a port where all the boats in the region came to and from. This volume of mass movement, some researchers suggest, was the cause of the decline of Ephesus. Throughout the millennia of the city's evolution, the idea of the Ephesian Artemis remained intertwined in the very heart of Ephesian homes. The recently excavated villas of the city permitted the team an insight into the lives of these very people, all of whom coexisted alongside the grandeur and pomp of the city. The mosaics adorning almost every home show us just how real this connection between the goddess and her city's inhabitants was. Depictions of myths and symbology present a great love for their pantheon and pride of their city.
Just across the street from these excavations lies the last of the great monuments to the city's patron deity, the Library of Celsus, a picture-perfect postcard of modern Turkish tourism today. A Roman construction at the heart of the urban sprawl, the facade of the library reaches up instead of across in order to demand such attention from a small and cramped space. This library would have served as a beacon of religious scholarship and argument, particularly in the city's turbulent transition to Christianity.
Many visit the city unaware of the library's extensive reconstruction in the 1970s, which significantly helped boost tourism in the Anatolian region. This image of the city, whilst impressive, is only superficial without a greater understanding of the people who frequented and read its scrolls. And while some of their history is being recovered as we speak, so much of the history of Ephesus is still buried underground. The Ephesus standing before us will be the largest site we encountered on our travels, and it is clear why the city was considered one of the most significant players of the classical world. Though the Ephesian Artemis is unique to this site, we would soon encounter the goddess again at our next stop, Sardis.
The journey to Sarp was a long one, navigating 2 long-haul coaches before taking one of Turkey's small dolmuş buses, which literally translates to "it is full." After a night's rest in Manisa, we travelled east, further inland to the ancient site of Sardis. The tumultuous and vibrant history of Sardis is owed to its status as one of the most important cities of antiquity. As the capital of Lydia, one of the Persian Empire's greatest kingdoms, Sardis rose to prominence in the 6th century BCE under its last king, Croesus. Croesus was known for his extraordinary wealth. Herodotus even weighs in his 2 cents by recalling that Croesus was the first king to mint pure gold and silver coins. We must of course take Herodotus's word with a pinch of salt. He was as much a self-proclaimed historian as he was a storyteller.
Lydian art and architecture were briefly the brightest in the Greek world. Whilst we missed the vibrant colours in our exploration of Sardis, weathered away by time and excavation, the extravagance was abundantly clear in the intricate carvings of the columns' capitals and cornices. Towards the end of the Archaic period, in the 5th century BCE, much of Sardis was burnt to the ground during the Ionian Revolt, a time of great uprising in the Persian Empire. Despite its fierce character during the Archaic period, the beginning of the Hellenistic period brought new leadership, and the city was consumed without resistance by Alexander the Great and his new empire.
The site of Sardis itself, despite its towering first impression, has no grand approach. Its antique part is comprised of 2 major buildings, the Gymnasium and the Temple of Artemis, separated by a dusty country road and a mile of sun-scorched bracken. After topping up on water from a local vendor, we began our exploration of the Gymnasium.
At first glance, the Gymnasium is a rather confusing building complex. The addition of new columns in the late 1960s to support the original architecture made it a challenge to identify new from old in the marble court, a 2-tiered column structure provoking questions of the extent of the site's authenticity. But apart from this monumental structure, the site itself appeared skeletal. Later we would discover that the site was much more extensive below ground, the marble court's mosaic floor for one being covered by earth to aid in preservation. Behind the marble court lies the remnants of a Roman bath, its impression still clearly carved in the ground. This is academically significant as it indicates a direct mixing of cultures, the Gymnasium a culturally Greek amenity with a bathhouse, a significant aspect of Roman life and culture.
The Roman bath is not the only structure changed under Roman influence. A short walk under the hot Turkish sun brought us to the Temple of Artemis.
The temple, first built by Alexander's successors in the Hellenistic period, was added continuously to by the Romans, including a redevelopment after the earthquake in 17 CE. As one of the largest known Ionic temples in the world, the Temple of Artemis is certainly an excellent example of the Hellenistic architecture, boasting the intricate floral carvings characteristic of the Ionic form, and providing scholars with a window into the construction process of a major Greek temple. The 2 original surviving columns were added by the Romans during architectural renovations to include worship of the imperial cult. Here, people could make dedications to the deified emperors and their families.
Whilst struck by Sardis's beauty and majesty, we realised that the Sardis we had expected was not the one we experienced. Perhaps this demonstrates how myth and stories can overtake history. Despite the knowledge that both buildings on site would be from much later periods, we still had arrived envisioning ruins dominated by the legacy of Croesus, the exuberant king, the Sardis of myth and mystery as depicted by Herodotus. Instead, only traces of this colourful era remain in the quiet whispers from the marble court. The Sardis before us, though more humble, felt more real than we had prepared ourselves for. Questioning our preconceived ideas, we left Sardis behind and travelled onwards to our next stop, Pergamon. At dusk, we leave the quiet city of Manissa crammed into the back of a taxi and travel an hour and a half northwards to Bergamo. After a night's much-needed rest, we begin the steep trek up to the Pergamon Acropolis. The ancient city traces its lineage back to the Trojan War, founded by the Greek legend Telephos, son of Heracles, who became king of Mysia, a region on the southern coast of the Marmara Sea.
Most of the ruins we see in Pergamon can be traced to the Ahlert dynasty, the successors of Alexander the Great, who reigned in the region from 281 to 133 BC. Only in 129 BC was their land passed over to Rome to be integrated into the empire, in accordance with Attalus III's wishes. The city itself continued to prosper under Roman rule all the way into the 2nd century AD, until its decline in the 3rd century due to raids and invasions from multiple caliphates, and later the Seljuk Turks.
Remnants of Pergamon's Hellenistic past were the most prominent amongst the ruins we encountered. During the reign of Attalus I, from 241 to 197 BC, commemorative projects of Pergamon's wars against the Gauls and Macedonians were started. His son engaged in a great building program, granting him the title of Eumenes II, the builder. Eumenes enlarged Pergamon city walls to cover 90 hectares, a significant expansion from the previous 12.
Upon the city's adoption of the Romans as the capital of the province of Asia, more important structures were completed. A Roman theatre was added, and the Temple of Zeus was converted to a temple honouring Trajan. The Asclepion, the famous shrine dedicated to the god of healing, Asclepios, and the final destination for the team during our time in Pergamon, was built on a neighbouring hilltop, a short drive from the main site.
The cult of Asclepion was an essential part of life in the ancient world. The Asclepion, a sanctuary serving as both temple and hospital, is thought to have been built in the 4th century BC. The sacred spring it was built beside was claimed to possess innate healing properties. It was an essential element to many medical practices carried out in Pergamon.
Patients would bring clay miniatures of their ailing body parts as an offering for Asclepius, and it was believed that, by staying overnight, the votive offering would cure the patient. Historians today believe that the emphasis on sanitary living conditions in the Asclepion was an essential factor in the site's remarkable healing abilities. The site was still famous well into the Roman period, and the Emperor Hadrian was reported to have visited in the 2nd century AD. The ruins we see today are from his reign, having parts of the site to preserve the Asclepion's grandeur.
Of course, Pergamon has a rich history spanning beyond its Greek and Roman past. So, why is it that we've mainly encountered these Hellenistic buildings? It could be as simple as the fact that Pergamon has never really reached the same size as it did in this period.
However, it could also be that the ruins were mostly excavated by Germans in the 19th and 20th centuries, a period of wartime competition, imperialism, and nostalgia for the European classical past. This nostalgia has meant that Greek and Roman structures are typically favoured.
Excavators, in an attempt to access and restore the classical ruins, dismantled the buildings of the Byzantine period, losing much of Pergamon's history in the process. Furthermore, the removal of Pergamon's most impressive structures, such as the Great Altar and its friezes, by German excavators, means that the site itself is incomplete. These are now housed in the Pergamon Museum in Berlin.
We seem to be left with a site that implies that only the classical period was of any importance, when in truth Pergamon was a city that changed hands almost as much as Izmir or Ephesus, with each change bringing with it a new past to be discovered. However, these histories may now be irretrievable. Many of the most important elements of Pergamon's classical past have been removed and taken to Berlin, in an attempt to showcase the history of Asia Minor within a collective of European culture, rather than giving the site its own unique voice.
From Bergamo we travel north to Hilsarlik, modern-day Troy, where the familiar Aegean meets the Thracian Sea, moving closer to the Grecian mainland. The difference in regions was almost unnoticeable to us, telling of the issue we would have at the next site. During pre-production, we cherry-picked sites from the literature of our textbooks, already aware of the biases of our European academia. But now, near the oft-repeated border of where East meets West, we would need to re-examine what consequences our fascination in the field actually had on the sites themselves.
To the average arrival to Hisarlik, the modern-day Turkish province is known for one thing: the alleged site of Troy, home to the very city walls that defended Priam against Agamemnon's hordes and the great warrior Achilles for 10 years, until Odysseus devised the infiltration of the city within the fabled Trojan horse.
The modern-day site today does little to dissuade us of the providence of this myth. A vast wooden horse, complete with stepladder, stands testament to the poet Homer's interminable legacy and epic. Indeed, Homer's myth has been front and centre of the academic debate around the site since the European discovery in 1801.
The mound of Hisarlik is significant for the beautifully preserved stratification of layers, revealing the extent of human presence which, as modern research suggests, dates back as far as the later Stone Age. However, our understanding of this pre-Homeric history as anything beyond ancestors to our ancient world has been strongly stunted due to the extensive damage the site underwent during original excavations. This mound, or tell, became a site of European preoccupation at the beginning of the 19th century, as it was thought to have been the site of the legendary Troy. European popular culture fueled much of the scholarship and academic interest of the time.
Little to no proper archaeological practice was employed in the early stages of excavation. This malpractice was not uncommon due to the Victorians' obsession with antiquity, but would be shocking by today's archaeological standards.
Victorian classicists aimed to discover sensational finds rather than learn as much about the site as possible. After all, evidence of early human development does not sell newspapers. Buried treasure, however, most certainly does. The most infamous culprit of this was Heinrich Schliemann.
Though Schliemann immediately took his findings to the press, he had serious concerns about the validity of his own research. He pointed out that Troy too seemed far too small to have been under siege for 10 years, and that the pottery found here seemed too early for the late Bronze Age.
What we are ultimately left with is a site clearly shaped by Europe's romantic fascination with the classical world. Whilst there has been, and continues to be, much gained in the field of archaeology and academia in the remnants of Hisarlik, our past fixation on Homer has left us ultimately wanting of the site's true value, of the rich periods of history that were almost entirely lost to us.
The site has prompted much academic debate on whether it is truly the ruins of Troy, a debate which has in turn inspired an influx of tourism, and thus influenced our perception of this site to overlook other cultures than the Greeks, such as the Hittites.
However, the living culture remains in and around the site today. Just 100 metres away, we experienced the hospitality of the nearby people, who didn't hesitate to feed 6 tired travellers who accidentally wandered into their wedding party. Our 2 weeks in Turkey exposed us to the chance to see with our very own eyes the ancient lands that have captivated minds for centuries. walking the paths that date back to before antiquity.
Each site was uniquely fascinating, boasting its own monumental beauty in different ways. Ephesus, an ancient wonder of the world, and the Izmir Agora proved invaluable insights into the very foundations of city life. Pergamon, the sacred healing ground, made famous for its supposed miracles that people would travel far and wide for. Sardis, with its magnificent temple, overlooking picturesque terrain, both examples of the grandeur of its former life and the promise of its restoration. And lastly, Thessalic, a city unrivaled in its impact on ancient literature and mythology, fated ultimately to be partly defined by its alleged history in the modern era.
Despite the individual beauty of each site, we still found a continuity and shared culture throughout the Aegean coast, pointing to the intricate social and political network of ancient Asia Minor. When we typically think of the scale and sophistication of the Greek world, we look to mainland Greece itself. Yet we cannot ignore the importance that these now Turkish cities played in the world of antiquity. Their roles as hubs of trade, beacons of spirituality, and sanctuaries of care.